Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Little Acts of Kindness. This will be Part 62, Chapter 62, entitled Dual Eyes. Shota felt something pressed against his lips, an extremely familiar something. Smiling, he kissed his husband back, opening his eyes a bit. "Good morning," Izashi murmured. "Definitely," Shota said. "I've breakfast cooked, with coffee ready for you to drink." "I'm up," Shota said, Hisashi moving away so he could sit up. He sat up and stretched his arms out, yawning. Getting up, he padded over to the living room, where Hisashi was sitting. Taking a seat, he reached for the coffee and took a big gulp. It was the perfect temperature. The two ate breakfast in a peaceful silence, the news station on in the background. Nothing important was happening, though there was a small clip of them reminding people to keep the lookout for Nashi Doi. After finishing, they washed dishes, Hisashi scrubbed, while Shota took the drying cloth and dried the dishes. When they finished, Hisashi's phone beeped. A few minutes of texting later, the blonde looked up. "Nezu says he's going to have All Might teach English while I'm out." Shota raised an eyebrow. "What about his time limit? He's barely scraping by in his hero lessons." "He's going to teach in his true form." Shota gave a hum. "Might want to text him to warn Midoriya, since Midoriya knows they're the same and might call him by his name accidentally." Hisashi nodded and texted again. As his husband texted, Shota's phone rang. Answering it, he held it up to his ear. "Eraserhead. Could you come down to the station?" "Sure," Shota agreed. "Thanks," Detective Tsukauchi said, hanging up. "I'm heading down to the station. Do you want to come and wait in the car or stay here?" Shota questioned. "I'll stay here," Hisashi answered distractedly, staring at his phone. "All right." Shota left the house after grabbing the car keys. He drove down to the station and entered. Being directed to where the detective was, he entered the room. Shota placed his hands into his pockets and leaned against the wall, waiting for Detective Tsukauchi to start speaking. Currently, the detective was organizing some of his papers. Finally, the man stopped. "Thank you for waiting, Eraserhead." "So, why did you call me here?" he questioned. Right now, he wasn't involved in any active cases, and he hasn't caught a criminal that was committing a crime that would require further questioning. The detective sighed. "I want to request your help on a current case." Shota gave a nod and waited. On Wednesday, the 21st, Pro Hero Amplifier and her intern, Anima, arrested Hachisuka Taro, who was caught distributing and possessing a new drug. This drug is called Dual Eyes. So far, it appears to only be in a testing phase, as no one's buying it. Instead, Hachisuka used his quirk to inject it into innocent people. Shota gave a nod when the detective looked at him, showing he was following along. He would ask any questions he had once Tsukauchi was done explaining everything. Dual Eyes is going to be advertised as a drug that'll allow its user to have a secondary quirk for a period of time. And while it does do that, it's the side effects that have caused some alarm. The drug is addictive and causes an increased emotional response. After the drug is worn off, the person's emotions are still off-balanced for a day after. We haven't been able to get a full diagnosis done yet, but we believe that this drug causes genetic breakdown, leading them to losing their own quirk, and if they continue using the drug, it leads to a full mental breakdown. The detective gave a grimace. Hachisuka has revealed that using two of them at once will grant their user access to their original quirks, and the quirks they injected, but that as soon as it wears off, it leaves them completely brain-dead from being overloaded with too many quirks at once. Shota straightened up as the detective stayed silent. "There's something else you haven't mentioned." Tsukauchi nodded. "People injected with the drug have their tongues turn black." He stilled, eyes focusing on the detective. "Not only that, but the way this is being distributed is very similar to how Trigger was before they moved to selling it." "You think the same people behind Trigger are behind this?" "Yes. Did you perhaps think that Hachisuka's name was familiar?" the detective prompted. Shota paused, thinking about it, before shaking his head. "Sorry, I don't think it is." "That's fine. It has been a few years after all. We didn't even make the connection until we read the report by Anima, who mentioned that his cousin seemed to think his sister would break him out." Shota didn't tense up, but it was a near thing. This was the second time a student was mentioned, only this time, with the additional information that Kota was related to these criminals. "The name of the sister is Hachisuka Queen, better known as the villain Queen Bee." That did cause him to tense up. I thought she was dead. We did as well, but Hachisuka seemed convinced she would break him out. Other than this and admitting that he planned to kill Amplifier via injecting 2 dual eyes, he hasn't said anything of use. Shota gave a nod, thinking over the information. He could see now why the detective asked him here, since Shota was one of the main heroes working on the original Trigger case a few years back. He grimaced, realizing that he might have to get in contact with Crawler. Because that boy had been at the center of everything last time, including having Poppy taken over by Queen Bee. If they were back, they might try and get vengeance on the vigilante, if they haven't already. Shota hadn't kept contact, and he doubted Tsukauchi had either, considering working with vigilantes was definitely on the gray side of the law. I'll start investigating and see what I can find, Shota said, agreeing to join the case. Glad to have you on board, Eraserhead, the detective said, handing over a case file. Shota took it, and with a nod he headed out, planning to browse over the file when he got home and create a plan of action. He drove home with some light music on. Getting to the house, he entered only to pause at the sight in the living room. Quickly pulling out his phone, he snapped a picture. Hisashi was covered in kittens. They were wiggling all over him, and Hisashi was just laying down with them. After the cuteness factor wore off, Shota took a better look and counted 1, 3, 5 kittens. Zaji. Why, that's too many, Shota mumbled. They had such busy schedules, they couldn't take care of 1 cat, much less 5 of them. Though if it helped his husband, he was all for it, and it wasn't like they couldn't spare the expense of hiring a pet sitter once Hisashi returned to his work. His husband just beamed at him from the ground. One of the kittens made their way over to Shota and meowed. Shota's heart melted as he picked up the kitten. He moved to sit down, petting the kitten. I've joined a case, Zashi. Anything I should know? One of the villains is related to Kota, but right now we're just investigating. Hopefully we can put a stop to it before it becomes chaotic. You expect it to? Yes. Remember the Trigger case I told you about? Before you started teaching at UA? Hisashi questioned, carefully sitting up so he didn't dislodge the kittens. That's the one. Damn, I thought they were taken care of. So did I, but apparently they're back. Stay safe, Sho. I will. I promise. Izuku came back from his run, and swallowed a bit as he saw Maboroshi, who was walking down the stairs, his giant dog following behind him on the leash. The man smiled. Good morning. Izuku gave a hesitant wave. Good morning, he called out, being careful with his volume so it wasn't too loud. The man just kept going on his way, Tenrei walking behind him. Izuku supposed he might have to get used to seeing the man around now. Walking up the stairs, he entered his apartment to finish up his homework. After an hour he finished, and he went to the kitchen to start lunch. As he was working on the prep, there was a knock on the door. Blinking, he went over and opened it, smiling a bit when he saw it was his grandfather. Hello, Izuku, the man said, giving a smile. Izuku let him in, closing the door. I was just cooking lunch. His grandfather nodded. Mind if I help out? Sure, Izuku said, and the two started cooking. For a few minutes it was silent, but then his grandfather started talking, saying how his week had been and that work was busy. Izuku listened, invested in hearing more about the Hero Commission. His grandfather never went into any details, keeping the information more about day-to-day stuff. Which made sense. After all, talking about what he was actually working on might be a breach in security or something like that. A half-hour passed, and they finished cooking the shrimp tempura udon. While his grandfather set the table, Izuku went to go get his mom, who had been in her room all day. She hadn't even come out to eat breakfast. Mom, lunch is ready. She looked up. Quirkless, Izuku, she whispered, raising a finger to her lip. Izuku just nodded, and she left the room. Really, why was she so focused on him being quirkless? Why didn't she accept that he had a quirk? Izuku's hand shook, and he took a moment to take a breath. It wasn't her fault she was so focused on it. It was because of the accident that she was like this. Izuku shouldn't blame her, even if it hurt to see her insist he was quirkless. Stepping out of the room, he went to the dining table where his grandfather was sitting down, his mom already sitting. Izuku took his own seat, and with a quick thanks, they started eating. Izuku and his grandfather lightly conversed, Izuku getting used to his grandfather. They finished lunch, and Izuku washed the dishes with his grandfather drying them as his mom returned to her room. They sat down on the couches and the conversation continued. The topic of conversation eventually moved over to pro-heroes and their quirks, the two soon becoming engrossed in quirk theories. Izuku had never met anyone who could keep up with him on the quirk rambles before, who could match him, and offer their own insight. It was a pleasant shock. During the conversation, his phone buzzed, and so checking it, he saw it was a message from All Might. Young Midoriya, while Present Mike is suspended, the principal asked me to teach English. Izuku looked at his grandfather, not wanting to be rude and text while they were talking, but his grandfather just waved a hand, silently giving permission. But your time limit. Don't worry, I'll be teaching in my true form, so I'll be known as Yagi-sensei to the students. Present Mike thought I should give you a heads up since you know about my true form. All right, I'll see you tomorrow then, Yagi-sensei. Smiling, Izuku closed his phone, and he and his grandfather resumed their conversation. After a few hours, his grandfather stood up. Well, I should get going now. If it's okay, can I come over next weekend? It's fine, though I am having some friends over for a sleepover, Izuku said, hesitating for a moment before calling them his friends. Yes, Ida was his friend, but Monoma was his rival, and could he really call Tokiyami his friend? After a moment of thought, Izuku inwardly gave a nod to himself. Yes, he did consider Tokiyami a friend. His grandfather smiled. That's fine. It'd be nice to meet your friends. I'll see you next weekend. See you, Izuku said, waving goodbye as his grandfather left. Now he had the rest of the day to himself. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 62 of Little Acts of Kindness. Chapter 63 will be up next. Hope you all are still enjoying this one, and as always, thank you so much for listening.